Hello, good evening. It is the 30th, the Thursday, and I just thought I'd read a bit. It's the 30th, so tomorrow is New Year. Can't wait for 2022. BLISS, Afterlife. It's a story I've written in 2006. Well, I started it in 2006, 15 years ago. What I'm reading now, the first, I don't know how many chapters, but the first, 45, 50 chapters is from 206, 207, then 208, when I got very busy and did only write sporadically. Anyway, here it is, chapter 42. This is a story about a reincarnation. Bliss died with 95 years of age, a day after her birthday party. You have to listen to the other chapters to know who's who. Chapter 42. Susan prepares. Susan is the daughter of Bliss as well. She has two daughters. Susan had been cleaning the house all morning. It always looked superficially tidy, but when she knew that Ben and Perfet were coming, she peered a little closer into the corners, and really, her house was dirty. Strange how she never worried about it generally. Everyone always commented that it was cozy. Well, she had good friends. Susan smiled. They probably never noticed the dust and the untidy cupboards, particularly the one under the stairs. Thank God she will never see the loft, she thought. Why did this worry her so much? Susan was annoyed with herself. She never noticed these things in other people's houses. In fact, perfectly decorated and pristine places always made her feel a little inadequate. How did they do it, she always thought. Ha! So she did notice, she thought. Well, sometimes her thoughts just wandered about ridiculously trivial things, and that put her into a mood which concentrated on the negative. She was well aware what her mind was randomly doing. Somehow the cleaning became therapeutic. She had decided to stop focusing on her negative feelings. She switched the radio on, and when she heard an old Bee Gees number, her attitude changed. This was a lovely house, really. Pity, the garden looked so forlorn in December. More jobs to do. Stop it. She loved living here. A little threadbare here and there, but money was always tight. Whenever she was better off, she ended up buying things for the refuge and not for her own place. The sun had come out, and when it shone through the freshly cleaned back window, she was glad she had done a good, thorough clean-up. Always worth it, she thought. If only once a year. She would never stop spending time with friends or reading, lacking time to do this sort of thing. But once in a while, a bit of pressure to transform the house was not a bad thing. Her eyes wandered to the clock again, 4:30 p.m. It was almost dark, and she switched on the little Christmas lights she had strung up outside. A little early maybe, but she loved them. A few candles to make the house feel cozy, and the last finishing touches. They were due at around 6 p.m. Tony was picking them up from Heathrow, and they would come here straight away. Holly and Chris were due to come tomorrow to join their son, who had been in Germany for months. It will be a great reunion. Her heart was beating just thinking of the wonderful time ahead. She had missed her son, and to meet up with his new girlfriend and seeing Tony again, who has always been such good friends with his cousin. He would be home a couple of weeks earlier than planned to get to know Faye, and she felt Tony also missed Ben. Her mind needed a little break, and Susan decided to do what her sister always recommended, have a cup of tea and relax with a meditation. She gave herself an hour to unwind. Funny, her sister Holly had been doing this almost all her life. She always seemed to be of one mind with their mother on this. Just sitting and contemplating. Like their mum, she liked to listen to quietly guided meditation. Susan had only really started doing this when their mum had gone. She was always encouraged by Mum and Holly, but it had never been her thing. Too busy. And somehow she never felt the need. although she knew now that she found it much easier to put herself into a positive frame of mind when she became more soul-conscious. She was always more temperamental than her mum and sister. She remembers being angry a lot of the time. When Bliss died, she had felt pain like never before. And somehow, she needed something to hold on to. Her mother had been so sure in her own mind for some time that she was a soul living in a physical body, not a physical body who has a soul. She remembered times in her past when this idea, as a reality, would have helped her to cope with a lot of obstacles. She just found it hard to imagine that there really could be such other reality beyond the physical. Anyway, never mind, she thought. Never mind about that, she thought. Focus on the positive, as Holly would say. She put her tea down and settled quietly to listen, as so often her mind wandered to the things her mother used to say. Chapter 43. Tony. Tony could not help hopping from one foot to the other, impatiently looking at the arrival board at Heathrow. The flight was on time and baggage was finally in the hall. It can't be much longer. He had arrived slightly earlier from Hamburg. The timing was great, as he had decided to come back once he had the travel plans of Ben's in hand. His year in Germany was over. He'd had a great time, but was happy to be back. He liked the atmosphere in an airport, always had. He would have liked to be a pilot, but it never worked out. Anyhow, he was quite happy. He got along really well with his great aunt Berry during his time in Germany. She was Mum's cousin and lived in Hamburg. It was great that he could stay quite cheaply at an old flat they still rented. He couldn't even remember why they still used it, but it had come in useful over the years for everybody. There was always a couple of students living there and a spare room for the family to stay. He had visited Berry often. She was a real traveller. They had many conversations about the big problems in the world. It seemed the whole world economy was in a mess. It seemed strange to him. When he left England in spring, everything seemed normal. And during the summer, he just remembered studying and having a good time. And when autumn came around, his aunt was talking a lot about the financial crisis. Credit crunch was suddenly a word he kept hearing. Tony was not really political. He was 24, and although he never had much money, he never worried too much about it. He jobbed during his studies and never had a problem finding a bar job. Except in October, everything seemed to have suffered a downturn. The papers were full of it. His Aunt Berry was working in business. She was a bit younger than Mum and Holly, 50 or so, he thought. Her two girls were still living at home. Eleanor was 18 and Petra was 15. They were great. Well, he would say that, he thought. He was their hero. They lived in a suburb of Hamburg. It was quite rural, though. He liked the peace and quiet there, but it was a bit far away from things for Tony. He loved the city. Barry was divorced from Dieter, their father. He was a nice guy, and Tony had been to see him a couple of times. He had a big motorbike, and Tony loved riding on it. He would never buy one, but the occasional ride on the back of it was fun. Boo! Tony jumped. After all that waiting, he was surprised by Ben. They laughed and embraced each other. Meet Faye. Faye, my cousin Tony. Hi, Tony. I've heard so much about you. And I've read so much about you, Faye. Welcome to good old Blighty. Faye laughed. She had heard this expression before, and she just loved hearing it and seeing it all. This nice, friendly-looking guy. They embraced, and she got the customary kiss on each cheek. She was glad that she'd been out of China quite a lot in the last 6 years. This custom would be too strange if you had never travelled. You would never see her grandmother doing anything like this, or anyone in the village her parents lived. She loved it. A certain openness. She felt it with Ben too. Being in love makes you love almost everything, she thought. Both guys took a suitcase and Taking Faye in the middle, they hooked their arms under her elbow and walked to the exit. Chapter 44. Back at Susan's house. Susan had been looking out of the window on and off for the last hour. It was almost 7 p.m. She saw the car approaching slowly and park across the road. Yes, that was Tony and the two travelers. They had taken a taxi from the station. She opened the door and Ben fell into her open arms. It was lovely to hold him again. He introduced Faye. What a lovely-looking girl, she thought. Not as small as she imagined, quite tall in fact, very slim and straight black hair. She had a nice open smile, and Susan embraced her heartily. Tony got a big kiss on the cheek. She wanted to hear all about Germany, but that can wait. Everyone was talking at the same time. Tony had not been here for a while and had not seen the little conservatory Susan had put in. It was lovely and warm. She had a little wood-burning stove put into the brick wall on the side, and the kitchen had been opened up and extended into the conservatory. It looked great. He knew how Susan had gone on for years about wanting to have an airy room with lots of light. Ben inspected the new addition. Like everyone, he didn't think it would ever happen. They laughed, and Susan walked up the step into the new kitchen. Faye thought it all looked great. For her, all impressions were new, and this looked so homely. She laughed the idea that they could all be sitting around when the cooking was done. At home, they all ate in the kitchen, and sitting there whilst her mum was cooking was something she had always loved. This was a little bigger than her mum's kitchen, but then Big Ben explained that this was a small kitchen before his mum's long yearned for big kitchen extension was realized. The refuge always had priorities in his mum's life. She deserved that, he thought. Faye was fascinated by the stories of the refuge, and she was looking forward to meet some of the people who were living there. Ben had told her a few things she remembered hearing about the suicide they'd had not so very long ago. She suddenly felt really tired and was glad to sit down in an armchair. They had all settled and Susan was making a cup of tea. "So, how did you enjoy your long flight? Have you ever been to London?" Susan asked. "I was able to sleep a bit. We spent some time watching movies." "No, I've never been to England. I spent some time in New York, and that was quite a journey too. I enjoy it though, but it's tiring." Susan could see that she was exhausted. All the excitement, some nerves too, she thought. "Do you take milk in your tea?" "I only have English breakfast tea, sorry. Is that okay?" "That's lovely, thanks, and I will try it with milk. I usually drink green tea, but I like English tea as well. It's nice, I like it." "Just as well, Faye. We English consider tea the remedy for almost everything." "So do we," Faye laughed. She liked Susan, and she felt that a whole load came off her shoulders. She sipped her tea and listened to Tony and Ben talking about the last few months. Ben was interested to hear about their Aunt Berry and her two girls. They both had spent many holidays in Germany. Their Omi would always keep in touch with her sister Cass, and even when she passed away 3 years ago, they continued visiting Berry, her only daughter, and their cousins. His mum, Holly, and Berry were great friends, and they used to see each other regularly since childhood. Bliss and Cass had been very close. His grandmother's connection to Germany was never lost. He was hoping that he could take Faye over there for a weekend, if he could get a cheap flight. It was nice to be back. He was glad to see his mum so well. He'd started to feel tired too. The food was almost ready, and he was glad to have a home-cooked meal, and then to bed. Tony looked around the room. He also enjoyed being back in England. He would go over to the refuge as there was a spare room. Susan had said that Isabel was looking after things tonight, and he knew her quite well. He felt wide awake, but he could see Ben and Faye were fading. "Food is ready." Susan had laid the table and put down a big shepherd's pie, some bread and brown sauce, baked beans. "Ben assured me that I should not worry about your taste. You like almost everything," he said. "I hope shepherd's pie is okay. It's his favourite." "Absolutely no problem," Faye said. She did have a very varied taste. It was good that she'd been in America for some time. She explored so many kinds of foods there and had become quite adventurous. Let's say a toast, Susan said. Everybody had a glass of wine or beer, orange juice for Faye, and they clinked glasses. To a happy pregnancy, a lovely stay in England, and all the very best for the future, Susan said. She almost started crying. Her son raised his eyebrows, and she laughed. This was usually her sister's problem. Too close to the water, their mum used to say. Susan rarely cried in these moments, but today she felt how different life will be in the future, and she felt a little overwhelmed by it all. Her mum would have loved this. She looked forward to Holly and Chris tomorrow. They would be here in the morning. And that's it. Chapter 44 done. Number 45 to come. Have a good evening.